what you see. Hey, look me over. Honey, do you like what you see? Hey, I ain't got no money, but baby, I'm rich on personality. Woo! Happy Saturday, Post family. Okay, Google, turn off. Google's jamming. Baby, if I have to scream and shout, baby, I'm a, whoa, might not know it now. I'm a star. Whoa. Okay, Google. Okay, Google. Okay, Google. Turn off. Woo! Happy Saturday, Post family. I'm going to stop referring to you all as Facebook family or Instagram family or YouTube family. I'm just going to refer to you as Post family. Welcome to another episode of Post Daily Dose with me, your trusted parenting advisor, faithful guide and servant on the journey to healing. What's my name? Big Papa Brian Post, and I love Prince. I love Prince. I usually get up about 5 in the morning, most mornings, and that's when I do my writing, and that's when I put on some Prince, and I just write, and it just fills me up. So I hope you guys slept good tonight, and I hope you're ready for Dispelling the Myths of Differential Diagnosis. Now, I can look at my YouTube here. I can't see my Facebook. I think I got it right this time, but I can't see the screen. I've got my just the camera facing me so you guys can see the board. So I can't see questions and comments and all that kind of stuff, but good morning. And we'll go back to just rock and roll. And let me just make sure. All right, Cindy. Hey, Sylvia. Just seeing you guys. Thanks for joining me. Okay, so here we go. This question came up from one of our members, and it just triggered. It's not something I even talk about. I really moved away from diagnosing children probably about 15 years ago. And I just saw it as more of a Band-Aid, and really I saw it more as scapegoating a child than I did as anything helpful and anything useful. And then as I dug deeper, I realized that there are a lot of professionals that actually believed much the same that I did. So that really made a big difference for me, because I believe fundamentally that when children act out, it's because they are stressed out. I don't believe, and that's for every diagnosis. And so when I start talking about dispelling the myths of differential diagnosis, it's about helping you understand and looking at something differently than the way we typically think about it in mental health. And really what I want to do is I want to free you from the confines of the label, because I believe the label itself is like a shackle. And once you get those shackles on you, you are held hostage. It's going to be hard for you to get loose. It's going to be hard for your child to get loose from that label. It's going to be hard for your family to get loose from that label, because everywhere or everything you see around you from that point that shackle is locked on you is limiting your understanding. And this is important, because as soon as I give your child a diagnosis, then what I am doing is I am limiting your understanding of your child and also the possibilities for your child. I'm putting your child within a category, within a box. And our society loves to put children in boxes because that helps us feel safe. As soon as I can put your child in a box and you can define that box and you can look at that box and your child feels safe and you feel safe because you have that label. Well, the problem with those labels is that one label may apply for a short period of time, and then you get another label, and then you get another label, and then guess what that label is really good for? That label is good for getting you a diagnosis. So let's talk about dispelling the myths of differential diagnosis. And on my Facebook Live this week, I mentioned to you a very wise psychiatrist that I study. She wrote a book. Her name is Dorothy Otnow Lewis. And she wrote a book called Guilty, and this came out in 1998. Big Papa's been at this for almost 20 years, so I go way back with some of this stuff. So she wrote a book in 1998 called Guilty by Reason of Insanity. And one of the things Dr. Lewis, now she's a psychiatrist at Bellevue, and she is most famous for being the last person to hug Ted Bundy before he was escorted to the death penalty. And the way she got there, and she actually developed a relationship with Ted Bundy, and you guys know him as the guy who was cutting up people and eating people, and he found people in his freezer and everything else. So he was definitely a psychopath. And she began studying our society's worst serial killers and psychopaths. And what she found, and she had a neurologist who collaborated with her on this, and I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, but he's referenced in the book. What she found is that all of the serial killers and psychopaths that she studied all had a significant history of trauma in their backgrounds, and it was oftentimes not given the importance and the attention that it should have been when they were on trial. And the significance there is, and even Dr. Lewis says in the book, is not that having a history of trauma dissolves anyone of responsibility, because it doesn't. Okay, bad things happen to us, but we still have a responsibility for our lives, and we still make choices. The significance of what she was trying to say is we must take into consideration the fact that these individuals are victims of the environments that they grew up in and the people that raised them. Therefore, we have to take some degree of understanding. We have to have some degree of understanding for their environments, because it's not as if they were just born to be bad individuals. And so it's a fantastic book, and it's really not that big. It's really easy to read. I've never personally met Dr. Lewis, but I tell you what, this book really changed my professional career. So many years ago, and I can say that now since, I'm 45 and I've been out this for quite some time, I came up with a concept called the labeling tree. And one of these days, I'm going to have a graphic designer create this bad boy for me. And so that's really going to be the context of our training this morning. The labeling tree starts with the tree trunk. And then we have the soil. And then we have the roots. And then up here, we have the branches and the leaves. So here's what I want you to understand. Way out here on the outside is where we have behaviors. Lying, stealing, and truly, I believe that you can put on the labeling tree, I believe you can put any of the behaviors that you encounter. These are some of the more common ones that I talk about. Aggression, depression, isolation. I also believe that we can incorporate and we can include things like high blood pressure, fibromyalgia, it just goes on. Let's see what's another really good. Oh, talking back. See, the significance is that these are all the outer labels, the outer branches of the tree, the outer branches and the outer leaves. Now see, inside here, so these become the leaves, these becomes the branches, these right here, in here. Now, this is where we get into differential diagnosis, because this is where we get Let me change up my colors here. This is where we get ADHD, PTSD, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, we call it generalized anxiety, autism, Asperger's, learning difficulties, learning delays, you follow me? So I'm going to make this real simple for you because I believe that all of this is actually very simple. The problem is it gets really complex in the application. Now, we go another level deeper than that. And we go right here. Now, once we get right here, we start to get a little bit more limited. This is where we start getting a little bit deeper into the origin of the challenge. Now, here is where we have, and I don't even know what the more common medications are now, but we can call it, I'm going to go old school with you. Call this Ritalin and Prozac and Valium and Lexapro and lithium, Wellbutrin, cholesterol meds, since I mentioned some health issues. Are you following me? This is exactly the way the labeling tree works. And then when we go a bit deeper, so we have all this, we have all these challenges. When we go a bit deeper, here's what we get to. We get to stress. Actually, I should put fear, stress, and then trauma. And so then what I could actually do down here is just go with stress and trauma. That's the labeling tree. Anytime in this, I have been seeing this for the last, and like I said, I've been in the field for almost 20 years, and this is exactly the way I've been looking at it for the better part of 15 years, is that anytime I see a child with severe behaviors, and that child has been diagnosed, that child is usually on some kind of medication, that child has some history of fear, stress, and trauma. Fear, stress, and trauma form the trunk of the tree, and the roots is stress. Oh, I don't even know if you guys can see the roots down here, but the roots down here is stress and trauma. So anytime we're focusing on children's challenging behaviors, we have to look at the stress and the trauma, because this is the root. Anything else is just clipping the leaves. So if you do anything else when you're working with your child or when you're working with a child, other than focus on stress and trauma, you're just trimming the tree. And all of you have hedges, right? Or most of us have hedges, or we probably as kids had to trim some hedges, or as adults you have to trim hedges. Well, what happens after you trim those hedges? They eventually grow back, don't they? And if you don't attend to those hedges for very long, then guess what? They start to get unwieldy. And then your hedges get all crazy, and you have to come trim them again. Well, that's what we're doing when we are dealing with diagnosis, and then ultimately when we start dealing with our medication and our children. What we fail to do is we fail to address the fear and the stress and the trauma. And just like any weed or any tree or any plant that you want to remove out of your garden, in order to fully remove it, you have to be able to get down to the roots. If you don't get down to the roots, it's eventually going to grow back. Now, I'm making this very simple, very simple. But Dr. Lewis, in Guilty by Reason of Insanity, says succinctly quotes, differential diagnosis to doctors means I'm not sure, but this is my best answer. Because that's what we start doing. Anytime you take your child to the doctor, to the psychiatrist, and you have to understand that the far majority of psychiatrists, just like physicians, are not specialists in stress and trauma. That's not their focus. It doesn't make them bad. It's just not their focus. Most medical schools are taught by professors hired by pharmaceutical companies because that's how they perpetuate their business. So when you take your child to an average psychiatrist or an average psychologist, you have to understand that they don't understand fear, stress, and trauma. They don't understand the way it impacts the brain. So you're going to go and you're going to tell them that your child is being defiant and he's stealing. Well, he's going to listen to this. He's going to ask you how long it's been going on. He's going to give you a bit of history, a bit of background. And then what he's going to do is he's probably going to give you a diagnosis. He's probably going to give you an ODD, an oppositional defiant disorder diagnosis. And occasionally he'll do a conduct disorder diagnosis. Usually that's when the behaviors seem to be a little bit more severe, but stealing falls in that category, hurting animals, fighting, frequently getting in control, or having social problems. You can get a conduct disorder diagnosis. Now, the next thing that's going to happen, because a lot of times this happens in stages. You go here to the counselor, right? You start with the counselor, and you tell the counselor about the behaviors, right? So a lot of times the counselor will give you the diagnosis, and then the counselor sends you to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist, here's the behaviors, seconds the diagnosis, and then gives you a medication. Well, this is where it gets challenging with children, and I call this, well, I'm not going to tell you what I call it until I explain it to you. So here's the problem with diagnosis and medication. So you get a medication for the diagnosis, ultimately for the behavior. Now, occasionally, and I don't know if you've ever experienced a little child who and when I say little, on average, the children that we've worked with at the Post Institute are about 10 years old on average, but we've worked the gamut from 3 all the way up to, I think our oldest participant at the Post Institute was 80, 83, 84 years old, and she's now well into her 90s. But typically, if you've ever seen a small child being put on medication, or especially a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD, this is like the most classical. Prior to taking the pill, they're hyper, they're alive, their eyes are on fire, they're glowing, they're smiling, they may be getting into all kinds of crap. Can't stay still, but they're on fire, they are living, and it feels good. And then you drop that pill, that little bitty pill, into that child's mouth, and in about 10 minutes, that child goes from being alive to completely numbed out and suppressed. I mean, I've seen children go from on fire to completely suppressed. Now, I'm gonna dig into that for just in a moment. The way our brains operate, you hear me talk about this all the time because it's so important. But in our society, we call that suppression. Let's just put this. Let's call this hyperactivity. We call that suppression fixing the child's behavior. So we give a pill, the hyperactivity goes away. We give a pill, the defiance may settle down. Maybe that. So let's leave it at that. So you got a pill, one pill, and these things go away. But here's what happens. So your child. Now, this is where it gets really, really challenging, and I realize I'm kind of going off, I'm tying in medication, because I guess I'm dispelling the myths of multiple medications while I'm dispelling the myths of differential diagnosis. The problem is you have one behavior that is suppressed, but Ritalin is also known for triggering, depression. So now the depression, right here, is a new behavior, is going to lead to isolation. So the depression and the isolation caused by the Ritalin get triggered. And now your child's not being hyperactive, and now they're not being defiant. Those behaviors are gone for the most part. But even when they come back, like when the drug wears off, you can just give your child a new drug. You can just give your child a drug again, and it'll suppress those behaviors all over again. But then what we're not paying attention to is that a lot of times the Ritalin is triggering a new sequence of behaviors, and we're just focused on the Ritalin diminishing the hyperactivity and the defiance. So it triggers a new sequence of behaviors, and then the cycle starts all over again. You go back to the counselor, you say the hyperactivity is better, the defiance is better, but now he seems depressed, and now he's isolated. And the counselor says, you know what, I've seen this before. A lot of times children with ADHD actually also suffer from depression. Now I want you to understand something about that. That's not accurate. There are two-thirds, let's go ahead and flip this real quick. There are two-thirds more boys that are hyperactive and subsequently diagnosed as ADHD, who Peter Breggin is another famous psychiatrist who you should study. He wrote a book back in the 80s called Talking Back to Ritalin. This is a psychiatrist. These are psychiatrists writing these books. He wrote a book called Talking Back to Ritalin and another one called Talking Back to Prozac, and he wrote a lot of good stuff. Let me wipe my brow. Well, it's starting to feel like I'm sweating up here like Bishop T.D. Jakes. I must be getting into it with y'all. Okay, so let me just check my comments. Make sure everything's okay. Oh, yeah, there we go. All right, yes, good deal. Okay, so Peter Breggin. There are two-thirds more boys diagnosed as hyperactive and two-thirds more girls diagnosed as depressed. You know why? Because the brain responds to stress in one of two different ways, by becoming hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused. And the significance is it's all in the gender. Girls are hypo, boys are hyper. It's just how our chemicals and our hormones run our body-mind system. But if you take that behavior, if you take the behaviors that come from these very natural states, these are very natural states. This is the difference between men and women. It's the difference between boys and girls. But if you take these behaviors that we oftentimes, that are actually natural in nature, that's some kind of, there's an English thing for that. It's just natural. If you take these things that are natural, and we don't like the behavior now, I'm gonna do something else. Come on, board, stick with me here. Let's look at the brain for a minute. And you all know I really like to look at the brain. So we got the big brain, right? This is a person. Throw a peace sign. There's a peace sign, and then there's the Spock. What is it? I know you Star Trekkies know exactly what that is. It's whatever Spock was. But this is your big brain. And then you have your midbrain. And then you have your small brain. Our small brain is our amygdala. And it sits right above the brainstem, which tracks all the way through our body. Our amygdala is like a radar detector. It's always scanning the environment for threats. And anytime it sees a threat, it pumps out cortisol and stress hormones. Those stress hormones go up to the midbrain. Now, the responsibility of the midbrain is to activate a hormone called oxytocin. So we got cortisol here. Whenever we see a threat, we release cortisol, because that's all your amygdala does. That's all your small brain does. Your small brain, I call it a small brain because it's small. It doesn't think. It's like your caveman brain. It's your lower limbic system. It just reacts. So it's just looking in the environment and it's just going like a caveman all the time. It's just waiting to react because it's waiting to protect you. It's waiting to turn on your autonomic response system. It's waiting to send you into fight, flight, or freeze immediately, knowing that freeze is always our initial reaction. So boom, it sends out cortisol, and the responsibility of the midbrain is to release this oxytocin hormone. And the oxytocin hormone is supposed to start calming down the cortisol. But before I get into that, let me show you something. When we see negative behaviors, our small brain gets triggered. So when we see things like hyperactivity, when we see things like defiance, when we see things like lying and stealing and self-mutilation and destroying things and mindless chatter and clinging behavior and social challenges, and the list goes on, encopretic behavior and inuretic behavior, the list goes on and on and on. Our small brain gets activated and starts pumping out cortisol. When our small brain gets activated and starts pumping out cortisol, this is really important right here, what I'm about to tell you. Joseph Liddell, he's a New York University neuroscientist, wrote a book called The Emotional Brain. I'm not going to write this whole statement referencing his book out. He says that in times of stress, meaning when our small brain gets activated and starts pumping out cortisol, anytime we see a threat, anytime we experience a threat, it could even be internal. When our small brain starts pumping out cortisol, anytime that brain perceives that threat, Liddell says in times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. Our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. So dependent on how, because the oxytocin, the midbrain, is responsible for calming that down, but you have to understand that this is a learned response. So your oxytocin response in your brain is learned, and it's learned through parenting. It's learned through repetition. It's learned through thousands of repetitions of being held as a baby, being sang to, being changed when you're wet, being nurtured as you grow up, parents who make eye contact with you and smile at you and spend time with you and laugh with you. That's always turning on oxytocin and touching you in appropriate ways and gentle ways. That's always training your midbrain to release oxytocin. Therefore, when your small brain experiences a threat, then your midbrain will release oxytocin, and then what happens is you send a calm signal up to your big brain. Your big brain is responsible for all your social and emotional relationships. Okay, but here's the key. When your brain, and I'm talking about the brain of an adult, this obviously applies to children, but when your brain experiences and senses a negative behavior, it becomes stressed. It becomes stressed, and you're not quite sure what to do. So over time, because what you don't realize is that the reason the child is having this behavior is because they're stressed. A stressed out child is an acting out child. So you go to the counselor. I'm bringing this all the way back full circle. You go to the counselor, you go to the psychiatrist, and you say, my child is having these behaviors. Well, guess what the behaviors do to the counselor and the psychiatrist? Now, granted, they're supposed to be the helping professionals, the ones who are supposed to calm you down and tell you we got this, but unconsciously, it actually stresses them out too. So when they get stressed out too, that's when they start focusing on labels. That's when they start focusing on encompassing a child within a box so they feel safer. So they give you that label, they send you to the psychiatrist, you get the medication, suppress one behavior, and then what happens is another behavior starts to get triggered because that medication changes hormones in your child's brain. So more behaviors come, you go back to the counselor gets stressed out just along with you, gives another diagnosis, sends you along with that diagnosis back to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist gives another medication. That medication suppresses certain behaviors, and then it triggers new behaviors. And again, the cycle comes back. You go to the counselor gives you a new diagnosis, and then with your new diagnosis, you come back to the psychiatrist gives you a new medication. And now, before you know it, your child is on 3 different meds. And if you continue this cycle, the meds will continue to increase. Because that is a cycle of fear. I call that fear-based prescribing. It is fear-based prescribing just as much as it's fear-based diagnosing. At the very most, the most important diagnosis we should be looking at with children is post-traumatic stress disorder. The reason we should look at post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm going to give you one more diagnosis, if there has to be one, is because post-traumatic stress disorder speaks to the fear, the stress, and the trauma. Post-traumatic stress disorder speaks to the roots. Anything else in these diagnoses speaks to behaviors. That's the difference. Now, Stanley Greenspan was really popular back in the 80s and 90s, but he helped formulate a DSM-4, and I don't know if it was a DSM for childhood disorders. Okay, so for children 0 to 5, I believe, I haven't looked at that book since the 90s, but it's for children 0 to 5. And in that book, he gave a diagnosis called regulatory disorder of childhood. Regulatory disorder of childhood. I latched on to that diagnosis, and I use that every time I had to give a diagnosis. Why do you have to give a diagnosis? For insurance. Why do counselors and mental health professionals have to diagnose your child right now? For insurance. Same reason a psychiatrist has to give that medication, for insurance, because that's how they get reimbursed. I don't diagnose because I don't take insurance. I don't take insurance, I don't diagnose. So I'm not dependent on insurance for paying me. So I don't have to give your child that diagnosis. But anytime I used to diagnose, if I had to diagnose the child, I always diagnosed the adults. I diagnosed everyone in the family, because if one child is operating at the level of stress, the level of fear and stress, to need a diagnosis, everyone is living in a level of stress that they can qualify for a diagnosis. That helped me keep from getting the child scapegoated, because ultimately, the moment I give your child a label, they are now a problem, and that's who everyone focuses on. That's the same thing with mental health professionals. The moment you bring your child into the mental health office and they give your child a diagnosis of ADHD, that label follows them into the school, it follows them into the home, it follows them into the community, and everyone looks at them as having a problem. But no one is doing anything differently to shift the environment or the relationships that the child is in. That's a problem, ladies and gentlemen. That's a big problem, because this is not just a child problem. Children act out because they're stressed out, and if they've been stressed out enough, there's fear, stress, and trauma, and oftentimes there's stress and trauma in the roots. Someone has to be willing to take responsibility to help the child develop a regulatory system. Children act out because they cannot regulate their stress. They cannot regulate the amount of stress that they are dealing with at any given time. Regulation is the ability to maintain stress within a window of tolerance. Once you exceed your window of tolerance, you move into what is called dysregulation. Dysregulation is the experience of stress outside of your window of tolerance. So when you move outside of your window of tolerance, that's when shit's going to get crazy. That's when behaviors are going to get out of control. That's when your child's going to be running around all over the place. Or if it's a girl, she's going to probably be depressed. She's going to be cutting. She's going to be sexually acting out. You got boys sexually acting out, using alcohol and smoking cigarettes, stealing. It just gets crazy at that point. Because what the child is fundamentally saying to you is, I do not have a regulatory system that is developed enough to be able to deal with my stress. And what does that mean? That means I have not developed and have not been taught a sufficient enough oxytocin response to dampen my cortisol outpourings to change the activity of my big brain. Woo! As Ric Flair would say. If your child is acting out, it's because he's stressed out and he needs someone to help regulate him. It is believed that being stressed out is a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychological and emotional disorders. All of them. Being stressed out. If that is true, the only thing you have to do is start learning how to lower stress. Start by lowering your stress and then start by lowering your child's stress. Okay? That's why when we are talking about your child's behavior, we got to focus on the fear, the stress, and the trauma. I hope this makes sense to you guys. Right? So just review this training, review this video, think about it, ask yourself. Here's something you can do very simply. You ask yourself, what are three things that I can do to lower my stress and my child's stress? What are three things that we are doing that are increasing our stress? I'm going to say that again. What are three things that I can do to lower my stress and my child's stress? And what are three things that we are doing that are increasing stress? Once you've written that down, and I want you to write those things down. Once you've written that down, I want you to make a commitment for the next 2 weeks to doing less of the things that are increasing the stress and more of the things that are decreasing it. Do less of the things that are increasing and more of the things that are decreasing, and you're going to start to see a big difference. But here's the deal. I know you guys came and you listened to me over and over and over again, and I'm so thankful. I'm so grateful that you do and that you follow me and that you share these videos and these trainings, because I want to help families feel better. I grew up in a home where my parents were stressed out, where my sister was stressed out, and I was stressed out. And no one knew what to do. No one. The only thing we knew to do, and the only thing my parents knew to do, was to do the same thing every other parent was doing. Yell and spank and take away and remove. And you know what that does? It just stresses the brain out even more. Now, I've gotten in my fair bit of trouble, but my sister got in a lot of trouble. And she got in a lot of trouble the whole time she lived at home. And unfortunately and tragically, she was killed in a car accident. And my parents had started to get on the right track with her, and things had started to work out better. My father had already passed away at that point. But I remember, sadly, after my sister had passed away, my mom said to me, "You know what your sister always needed, but she didn't get?" And I said, "What's that, Mom?" She said, "Understanding." She said, "We never understood what she needed." And it was so true. And I already knew that at that point, because I've been training in this stuff and doing this stuff for a while. So I already knew it. But what I'd also learned early in my career, is that I was doing the things that I was doing because I wanted families to experience more peace in their homes and parents to experience more love and more joy than what my parents experienced in our home. And so that has always been a motivating and guiding influence in my life. And that's why I show up every day for you all, because I want to, if I can just turn on the light bulb for one family, for one child, then that's going to make it worth it. So this is obviously not for everyone, but there are parents out there who want to learn more. There are professionals out there who want to learn more, and I want to invite you to join me at the New Parenting Revolution. You go to this website, New Parenting, not Revolution, Love Olution. NewParentingLoveolution.com. And I want you to join us. It's my private membership. We have a private Facebook group, and I've got lots of educational resources specific, like a 16-week master parenting class. You can take 16 weeks of me teaching you directly. I've got live videos. I'm going to show up with you every single day for 18 days so that when your child tells a lie, you know exactly what to say. When your child steals, you know exactly what to do. When your child is defiant towards you and they won't take out the trash and they won't turn off the television and they won't get off the computer, I'm going to give you the step-by-step things that you've got to do, the prescription to follow to help move them further away from negative behaviors and closer into relationship with you, which is going to make all of you feel better and help you feel more loved. So I want you to go to New Parenting Revolution. And right now, for a very short period of time, you can sign up for the New Parenting Revolution, a lifetime membership for $297. It's lifetime. So I add new content there all the time. You can even do my trauma-informed certification. You can get it there. But I said this is a short time because in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be going live with this, and you'll see that the price is $695 for a lifetime membership. But in a couple of weeks, we'll also be offering a $49 monthly membership fee. But right now, you can go and you can join for $297. It's going to give you lifetime access, and you can start learning more from me today. You get immediate access. I just helped a family who's in our private Facebook group, would deal with and navigate through a school situation. It was causing them a lot of stress. They've already started to see some transformation in their home. So for $297, you can get lifetime access. You get access to me. I go on every month. I'm going to be doing a live Q&A just for our private membership groups. But right here, go to newparentingrevolution.com. Let me work with you. Let me work with you. Let me join you. Let me help you gain the understanding that you need to start melting your child's behaviors. So that's all. That's our post-daily dose XL version. Thank you guys for joining me. God bless you. Remember, in any given situation, in any given experience, we always have two choices. We can continue to react from our past imprints of fear and stress and overwhelm and anxiety, or we can stop. We can take some deep breaths, we can slow down, and we can choose love. Be fearless. Do your best to choose love. When you can't, when you get stressed out, come back. Come back, because it's not the stressor, it's the repair of the stressor that makes all the difference. Choose love. God bless you. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you guys next time.